Welcome to another episode of Maestro Speaks podcast.
The equivalent of love is forgiveness. You cannot love without forgiveness.
Lumabalin ka nagiti yung generation anda kumamot nga mapasaran.
Nagdag nga morning mo ako il Maestro.
Tanya deh kung nanay tayo may isa.
I-appeal mo.
Buhayin.
Appeal ko man kada gitu ko. Pipi ako man pilit ganyan. Tutok mo.
Di pa nag-approach mo rin?
Approach.
Beta. Nang nangag ko nga ibagbagan ka lang ni Lola kini.
You better know the substance of the law.
Bayaw mo nang ibagas ni Manong.
And who cares if people have dark skin, right?
Kaanakan iti with expiration.
You find any inspiration in this, we have done, and you have done your noble part.
Right. Hello once again. This is another episode of Maestro Speaks podcast as usual. And because we are having this as solo, we'd be talking about history as usual. And what we did before, we'd be reading some articles of history. And to start this one, I just like to ask those who are listening, especially those fellow Igorots or Igorots, if you have heard about the Cariño Doctrine. So Cariño Doctrine came from the name of Maestro Cariño, a native of Baguio City. And this is where Senator Robin Padilla claimed that this is the roots of his family. Right. And so what we have here is the Cariño Doctrine because of Maestro Cariño when he tried to when he went up against the United States government or the insular government, US government in the Philippines in a claim for his land. So to start with, it is better, I guess, if we'll take a look at the life of Maestro Cariño. So according to Wikipedia, Maestro Cariño was an Ibaloy chieftain who owned the land that was to become Baguio. He led a successful revolt against the Spanish garrison in La Trinidad and was proclaimed the Capitan Municipal of Baguio by President Emilio Aguinaldo. All right. Now, there's some site we need to fact check these things here, but as we know that Wikipedia is somewhat not that trusted really, but I went on to do some cross-referencing, and I think I found this one to be, in my opinion, somewhat credible. Right. So, long time ago, so to paint the scenery here, so way back in the day, Baguio City is not Baguio City then, so the name of the place is Cafaguay, right? So it is a rancheria, or it is where you, what do you call that one? It's where you put your cattle. And he owned this land. Majority of the places in Baguio, accordingly, was owned by him. And how did he acquire this land? According to Wikipedia, is that um, the titles for the land were given to him by the Spanish colonial government in exchange for his conversion to Christianity. So let's take note that during the Spanish regime, the Spanish are having this problem of converting the Igorots to Christianity. Now, like I said before, that converting to Christianity is another way of conquering people, because if you will convert to Christianity, you will be forced to let go of your old ways and like adapt the ways of those who converted you. Now, maybe one ways of converting people is like telling them that they'll be receiving a big reward if they will be converted. Now, this one needs some citing because as far as we know, Mateo Cariño is an Igorot, and maybe if he's living in Baguio and Cafaguay back then, maybe he has the right for the land. He has the natural right for the land because he is a native of Cafaguay back then. But as to this text here, it says there that because of his conversion to Christianity, that he was awarded this land. Now, I would say I can take this, or I would believe this, because of his name. He changed his name into Mateo, which is a Spanish name, and the family name is Cariño, which is also a, what do you call it one? A Spanish name. So just continue. He says there, his surname was adopted after his conversion. Okay. The land was a rancheria known as Cafaguay, and was the residence of Cariño clan and the rest of the Ibaloy community. So just to clarify this one, they were living in the land way back. So it's the land of the Cariño clan. The only thing that they got from the Spanish, so they'd been living in that land for a long time, for years maybe, and the only thing that was given to them by the Spanish is the title. It's a title that they own that land, right? So that's how this one was started. And after the Spanish regime, here comes the American, right? So in 1901, Cariño was elected a representative of Baguio to chief executive of the U.S. insular government over the Philippines. Cariño reportedly gave Emilio Aguinaldo, president of the revolutionary government of the Philippines, who was fleeing to Hong Kong, a refuge when they were running away from the American forces. This is said to have caused the American colonizers who took over the Philippines to issue military decrees that mandated the confiscation of Cariño's land. Now here comes now the problem. So Cariño's land, because of these of Cariño's support to Emilio Aguinaldo, this made the Americans angry, and they issued this decree of confiscating the Cariño's land. Cariño involved himself in legal dispute seeking for the voiding of the decrees until his death in 1908. He had a favorable posthumous legal victory when the U.S. Supreme Court recognized his native title over his land, which was established through testimonies that the land was utilized, owned, and occupied by the indigenous population. So that was the very short, very short, what do you call it, the summary of that one. Now, the case of Cariño had a legal victory over the later, that would later serve as the basis for the eponymous Mateo Cariño, which concerned indigenous rights over ancestral lands. So, So what happened here was that the Americans confiscated the land and said that all lands now belongs to the United States government. So instead of having going to or resorting to you know, a war like any other people would have done during that time, this guy Macho Carino resorted to playing the games of the Americans, right? Now, this is one of a one of the moment that we can be proud of as Igorots. And much of the people nowadays don't know this one. So just to start with, how did it started? So let's just paint the scenery of Baguio City. And what part of Baguio City was owned by Macho Carino? We have here, accordingly, this includes the Janhay, Camp Janhay nowadays, the Rizal Park, and the other part of the Central Business District, and some part of the city outskirts. Okay. So, like what we said a while back, this was their land. It is where the Ibaloy community lives. It is in the part of majority of the part of Baguio. And the Americans came up to Baguio and took possession of the land, disregarding any claim of ownership from its settlers. Among the properties taken were those belonging to Cariño. Now, there are some conflicting stories here, like what we had in the Wikipedia. And well, anyway, immediately after Americans came here, that they already declared that they will be taking control, and included in that confiscated land was the land and the land of Matthew Cariño. And again, maybe we can say it's a possibility that because Cariño helped Emilio Aguinaldo, that is one of the reason, or it's a retaliatory form for them to take revenge. So on June 23 of 1903, Cariño filed a petition in the Court of Land Registration, praying that there'd be granted to him title to a vast tract of land of 146 hectares situated in the town of Baguio, province of Benguet, together with the house erected thereon and constructed of wood and roofed with rimo. The lower court and the Philippine Supreme Court, which is still under the American control, denied the petition. And so this is what I'm saying a while back, that instead of retaliating and fighting the Americans in battle, what Matthew Cariño did is to have his fight in using the legal process of the Americans. So take note, during this time we are already under the American regime. So when he filed a petition that he can be granted what do you call that one, a title for those lands that he owns, the lower court of the Philippines, lower court in the Philippines and this Philippine Supreme Court denied the petition. So Justice Charles Willard, who penned the majority opinion, argued that Cariño could not have owned the land because the Spaniard had failed to convert the Igorots to Christianity, which meant they were considered uncivilized and therefore could not have availed the laws on land ownership. So that would be the reason, according to Justice Charles Willard, that which is somewhat true, maybe, in if we are going to trace back history, that Igorots were never conquered, right? Now, that fact that Igorots were never conquered was used by the Americans to say that because the Spaniards never conquered them, they don't have, they could not avail the laws on the land ownership given to the Spaniards. Under the expressed provision of law, a parcel of land, being common origin, presumptively belonged to the United States during its sovereignty, and in order to perfect the legitimate acquisition of such land by private person, it was necessary that the possession of the same pass from the state. And there's no evidence or proof of title aggression of this land from the domain of the Spanish government, nor is there any possessory information equivalent to title by composition or under agreement. This is the GR number 2869, Matthew Cariño versus the Insular Government. So, like what we were saying a while ago, that they used the fact that the Igorots were not under the the Spanish government earlier, right? So that fact is now like the reason why the Supreme Court, Philippine Supreme Court, under the American rule, denied the claim of Matthew Cariño. Now, moving on, the case reached the United States Supreme Court, where Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, one of the most widely cited United States Supreme Court justices in history, ruled in favor of Cariño. So, of course, because we are under that United States government, after this Philippine Supreme Court, it was carried out and went up to the United States Supreme Court. Okay? And so take note, this, it took so long. For example, it was filed in 1903. This was in 1903, wherein Mr. Matthew Cariño filed went into this legal dispute. And then in 1909, of February 23, 1909, Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes came with the decision in favor of Cariño. So Holmes acknowledged the fact that Spain could not have granted land titles to Cariño for reasons mentioned by Willard. So it is true. So according to Holmes, yeah, that is true, that the Igorots were not conquered, and that, yeah, he could not be granted a title or a land title by the Spanish government because, first and foremost, they were not under the Spanish government. Okay? But nevertheless, he went on to recognize the native titles. In simple terms, the court upheld this valid claim of land ownership hinged upon tribal customs and tribal recognitions of ownership. So, even though the Spanish, it is true that the Spanish cannot give a title to a person who doesn't have or who is not under their control, it is still true that Cariño owned the land through native titles or because they were there, through tribal customs and traditions. So Holmes said, the land belonged to Cariño under the Igorot law. He had inherited it from his ancestors in accordance with the native customs, and his title had never been questioned. So, in the Igorot law, when Cariño claimed, according to the Justice Holmes or Justice Wendell Holmes, when Cariño claimed that land, 146 hectares and all, was claimed by Mr. Cariño, he or his fellow Igorots never questioned it, and they witnessed for Cariño that he really owned that land. Under the Organic Act of July 1, 1902 of 1369 32-9691, we are not I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know how to read these things, numbers here. Property rights are to be administered for the benefit of inhabitants. One who actually owned the land for many years cannot be deprived of it if it, for failure to comply with certain ceremonies prescribed either by the acts of the Philippine Commission or by Spanish law. So that is the weapon that has helped Cariño. This is the basic tenet upon which the concept of ownership via native title was founded. The landmark decision gave rise to what is known now as the Cariño Doctrine. So because Cariño won this one, it was now called the Cariño Doctrine. Now, what's the implication of this? This did not. So after this one, the decision, if usually based on my knowledge, if there is a Supreme Court decision, Supreme Court decision can now be considered as a law, and it can be used in deciding other cases. So now, after Cariño won this legal dispute against the United States, it was then now called the Cariño Doctrine. And the implication of that one is it did not only help the indigenous people of the Philippines, but it also helped communities native communities like the Indian communities of the United States. It has also helped Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, to mention a few. Okay, so courts around the world continue to cite this jurisprudence in protecting the rights and interests of the original inhabitants of a certain territory. Though Cariño didn't live to see the fruits of his remarkable fortitude, his bravery in daring to challenge the Americans brought hope for all indigenous peoples of the world who are struggling to regain ownership of or seek recognition of lands that are rightfully theirs. Sadly, many people in the Philippines know little about this heroic ordeal and its resultant victory. Throughout history and even in our present timeline, the Igorots have been instrumental in the country's continuing journey towards nation building. Cariño is just one of the many tales of Igorot valor that current and future generations should be aware of. Now, what I'm reading right now was a post from Igorot, and Igorot also copied this one from www.gpabela.com. So, like what it says there, well, a lot of us does not know that history. So, Robin Padilla was right when he said during the campaign that in Baguio, that where the people are standing was owned by his forefathers. And just to dig deeper about it, this is how Cariño protected his property. And so, though he did not live long enough to see his victory, the victory is still echoing to this day. It still has the effect on us. Natives can now, I think, we already have now the IPRA law, or the indigenous people's right, and one of the provisions is this one. Okay, a long time ago, we do not have the what do you call this one? We do not know. We own the land, but we don't have the legal paper to say so, and we can use that native law, right, which was highlighted by this experience of Mr. Cariño. Very little fact are being shown today about Igorots, and while I'm doing this podcast, I'm amazed to see these things here. So it's amazing to do this podcast. One of the things is that I have learned a lot, just searching for topics that I'd be talking about during the podcast. And I encourage everyone, Igorots here and abroad, to do the same, to look deeper into our history and find the contributions that we have as Igorots in the earlier days and up until now. We have a lot. But most of all, the very thing I want to highlight for doing this podcast is that we have to do this so we will not forget those great contributions that our forefathers has contributed to the growth of our country as a whole, right? And let's continue doing this. And like I said, as an Igorot, we have to be proud of where we came from. We have to be proud of those achievements by our forefathers, and we have to do something to contribute also to the growth of the Igorot community or the Igorot nations, and to the growth of our own country, right? So this is a podcast that is very short for this time. And I hope I have brought some information to you guys, the listeners. And before I go, I want to say that this podcast is brought to you by
Sponsor Time. So this podcast is brought to you by Dems Auto Performance. Dems Auto Performance Shop offers automotive servicing and very sila ng kahit anong klase ng sasakyan. Wallang Aeroplano, located at Alapang, Trinidad, Benguet. Of course, they also offer off-road servicing. Sa mga naglalaro ng off-road, gustong pa-convert ang sasakyan sa off-road, you can visit Dems Auto Performance at Alapang, Trinidad, Benguet, or you can also visit their Facebook page.
Okay, so I'll be seeing you again in the next podcast. This is El Maestro saying take care and God bless everyone.